Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. If I were to meet you far from the part of this country I love, somewhere on the eastern seaboard, say, and you asked me where I was from, I might tell you, west of here. But you probably wouldn't accept that as a particularly good answer, because, say we were standing somewhere in Virginia, west of here could mean West Virginia, it could mean Missouri, it could mean Wyoming, it could mean California, it could mean Japan, right? Depending on how far you want to take that western direction. So we wouldn't accept that kind of imprecise language about, just relatively west of here and talking about a place, but we routinely accept that kind of vague, relativistic description about the past. What I want to talk about in this video, part of my Ranch Porch Series, is the fact that the past has a past, and that we do ourselves a disservice in studying a particular period in the past by jumbling it up with all the other pasts that are past or future relative to it. The other day, my dad showed me a picture of my great grandfather, well, one of them. And I was struck because in this picture, he's already an older man. He's in his 60s, but he had my great-grandfather fairly late in life, and so that man is sitting there as just a small little boy. He's 2 or 3. And it was remarkable to me to think about the fact that that boy of 3, say, knew me as a 2 or 3-year-old before he died when I was that age. I don't remember him. But it reminded me that, here was someone at the very, very beginning of his life who knew me at the very, very beginning of mine. And, if I had known him, I would have known him as an old man. But anybody knowing him when this picture was taken would have known him as just a tiny boy. Everything is old or young in relative measure and relative to something else, right? The old man he's standing next to there, my great-great-grandfather, who was the age I am now during the Civil War, he was a young boy at one time, and that goes back over and over and over again to his great-great-grandfather and his great-great-grandfather. And if we could see pictures of all these ancestors, you would see them young and old. Probably not that many of them ever got old, but young and older, going back, if you want to just make the cut off the human species, something like 1,000,000 years. There's no ultimate past, and that's true of one's family, right? I mean, there's no way to say, this is your original ancestor, right? What does that mean? Right? Because you can always go back one. There's really no meaningful cutoff. But we have, we act like there is. We say, we understand what somebody means when they say something like, I found out that my family came to the United States from Norway, say, and now I'm trying to find out more about, my heritage. Well, it's not to say that it's not real heritage, but people act like that's like the ultimate origin, right? There's a legitimate interest in these earlier stages of your family, but saying like, what's really me or what's really mine has to do with this place that my ancestors passed through, but it's always passing through, right? They were somewhere else before that, and they were somewhere else before that, and they were somewhere else before that. There's a chain of production, if you will, that doesn't have a starting point. And, again, it's easy to see this spatially, right? There's no west. If I just say that I'm from west of here, that could mean any point west of that point. And there's also no ultimate old, no ultimate ancestor, no ultimate origin. So what happens that's unfortunate is when we're actually studying a discrete point in the past, say the Viking Age, we get tempted to mix it up with all the other pasts, especially pasts that are associated with it geographically, say. So this happens in dealing with the Viking Age, say, when people want to write Old Norse and Elder Futhark. Well, that's old. Well, it comes from Scandinavia, but in fact, that alphabet is much older than the language we call Old Norse. Or it happens with mythology, where there's this notion that I encounter pretty frequently that the god Tyr is quote unquote actually the main or chief god of the Norse gods. Well, that's definitely not true if you look at our actual written sources for Norse mythology, the Poetic and Prose Edda, which themselves are written at a time when these myths were a matter of nostalgia. In those texts, Tyr is a fairly minor figure. That doesn't mean he always was, but in the Eddas, he has his hand bitten off by Fenrir, and he goes with Thor to get the cauldron from Hymir. And that's more or less the mythic persona of Tyr in the Eddas. He is far from the chief god. Odin is clearly the god with authority over the other gods, and Thor is clearly the most popular god among human worshippers, judged from things like the popularity of the Mjolnir amulets and runic inscriptions that say Thor, bless, and all of the people and places named after Thor. Tyr is definitely not the chief god of the Viking Age, at least the late Viking Age, at least in Western Scandinavia. That is not to say that at one point he was not the chief god. It is possible that earlier on Tyr had a much more prominent position. That's suggested largely by the fact that his name comes from the same name in Proto-Indo-European as the name of the god Zeus, or the first part of the name Jupiter in the Roman religion, or Zeus Pitar in Vedic religion. That does not mean that in the Viking Age he was a Zeus-like figure. Yes, he might have been earlier, but we don't know that for sure, and it tells us nothing about the point in the past that's called the Viking Age. Right? But we mix these up, and we end up saying, actually, because this is or might be an older stage, it's truer. Well, that makes pretty little sense when you apply that analogy to a human being, right? Is my, I don't know, just to take an arbitrary point, is my direct patrilineal ancestor 1 million years ago, is he a truer me than I am? That doesn't make sense, right? I'm me, he's him, was him a long, long time ago. Maybe there'd be some surprising similarities between us, I guess, if we met. But that doesn't mean that learning about him really tells you that much about me, or vice versa, right? I live in a world unimaginable to him, and vice versa. The same way with stages of a society. To say that Proto-Indo-European society, if you want to go back to a pretty early discrete point that we can say something about. So the society of the people speaking the language ancestral to English and Norse and Hindi and Russian and Farsi about 5,000 years ago. To say that that's somehow the true society, the true language. Old always gets tied up with true for people. For those of us who speak later Indo-European languages, it's just strange because 5,000 years before Proto-Indo-European, there's Proto-something else. We can't reconstruct it because it's that far back, but there was some other language spoken then. And the same way back maybe 1 million years, it's hard to know when the origin of human language was, because possibly the adaptations for it preceded speech, or possibly the adaptations for it followed speech. We just don't know. So I don't understand, or I understand the temptation to try to find the oldest this, the oldest that, and say this is the truest this or the truest that. But we have to resist that. I think it's fascinating, by the way, to try to figure out the oldest of anything. Right? This is part of what got me into historical linguistics in the first place. I found Old English and I wanted to get even further back. Right? In a given place, like here where I stand in Jackson, Wyoming, I take a great interest in who was here before. What can we know about the earliest human inhabitants of this valley? What can we know about what it was like before there were human inhabitants of this valley? Where did these mountains come from? What was here before these mountains? I think these are all very fascinating questions. But there's not some true version of Jackson Hole that looks like whatever this place looked like in the Precambrian, right? This is the true version right now. There was another true version 100 years ago. There was another true version 1,000 years ago. These are all true, right? And I think the only place where the sort of older is truer idea comes in an authentic form is maybe with creative works, right? Something like, say, the poem Havamal, the poem of Odin's wisdom. If that is one single cohesive original composition, which is not guaranteed but is possible, then there would be an original version of it, and you could call that the true version of it, right? And that might be, in Old Norse, it might be in a preceding stage like Proto-Norse. More likely, each individual stanza has its own provenance, or maybe different sections of stanzas. I would buy Gestotholter, for example, stanzas 1 to 79 is one original composition, and again, there could be some original version of that you could call true, but then that's a creative work. That's actually a set of poetic arrangements of text that go back to some creative mind. You can say Odin if you like, and it has an original true point. No human culture, no human language, no human family has that ultimate original true point. There's only points all the way back and as far forward as we let ourselves go. Well, I hope that's been in some way a useful meditation on the subject for you. And for the most beautiful place in the world, there are many, but they're all in the Rocky Mountain States, Jackson Hole in beautiful Wyoming. I'm wishing you all the best.